Okay, good morning and good Chodesh. Perek Ches Mishna Aleph. Klal Gadol Amr B'Shvius. An important rule was said regarding Shemitah. Kol HaMiyuchad L'Machal Adam. Anything that is reserved for being human food, for human consumption. You cannot make it into a plaster, even for a person. And of course not. It's not even necessary, and that's not necessary to say that you can't do so for an animal. Now, what they used to do is, if they had a wound, is basically chew up some kind of food, and then use it, and then put it on top of the wound as a plaster. So we're saying that during Shemitah, if you have a food that's designated for people to eat, you cannot use it for people as a plaster. And of course not, you cannot use it to make a plaster for an animal. The truth is that once something is already reserved or designated to be used as human food, you can't feed it to an animal on Shemitah. These are all based on psukim, on verses in the Torah. That something that is designated for a person, for eating, must be used for eating purposes. Now, eating purposes, as we've said before, doesn't only mean eating. It means using it in a way that you benefit from it as you consume it, as you eliminate it, as you use it up. And therefore, as we said, dying is also permissible to be done. But whatever you're using it for, it has to be fit into the category of eating. And if it's designated, if it's reserved for people, so then for eating for people, they can only use it for eating purposes. Using it as a plaster on your wound doesn't fall in the category of eating. And you can't even use it for that for a human being, and all the more so for an animal. And the halacha is that once something is reserved for eating for a person, you can't feed it to an animal. Now, anything that's not reserved for being eaten by a person, which means that it's meant to be used for an animal. Now you can use that as a plaster for a person. If it was designated for an animal to eat, you, a human being, can use it for a plaster for himself. But you can't use it as a plaster for an animal. It's designated to eat for an animal. So for animals, you can only use it for eating. For a human being, you can use it as a plaster. And anything that's not designated, neither for human consumption or for animal consumption, it's one of those things that's not inherently reserved for any one of them. So then, if you now had in mind to use it for both, either for human consumption or animal consumption, so now we put on you, or on this food, the stringencies that apply to human food and the stringencies that apply to animal food. Now, the stringencies to human food is you can't use it as a plaster, as we said before. The stringency regarding an animal food is that animal food cannot be cooked, because that's not how animals eat it. And you're not allowed to do that to Shemitah food. Shemitah food has to be treated the way it's normally treated. And therefore, if it's designated, if it's reserved for animal feed, then you're not allowed to cook it. Were it to be designated for human food, of course you could cook it. But now that you took this food that was not inherently reserved for either human consumption or animal consumption, and you had in mind for either one, so now you have to follow the laws of both. You have to follow the laws of it being human consumption. You can't use it as a plaster, even for a human being. And you can't cook it, because if it's human food, if it's animal food, you can't cook it. That's not how animals eat their food. Now, what happens in a situation where again, we're talking about some kind of a food that's not reserved for either one. And the Mishna said you had in mind to use it for both, either or. And what if you only had in mind to use it for one? So the Rambam brings down that the Rambam writes that if it was designated for human consumption, then it'll only be subject to the stringencies of human consumption. If you now designate it for human consumption, then it takes on only the stringencies of human consumption. And as the Avram says, it stands to reason that unless he decided to use it for animal food, then it only follows the stringencies of animal food, which means you can use it as a plaster for human being. The Mishna's case was you had in mind both, and this is what happens if you only have in mind for one. Then the Mishnah concludes, Chashav alav la'etzin. Let's say again, we're talking about this food that's not inherently reserved for human consumption or animal consumption. You decided to use it for wood, for fuel. Hareu ka'etzin. Then it gets the status of wood. Wood that grows during Shemitah does not have any status of Shemitah wood whatsoever. Because as we mentioned before, using wood, which means using it as firewood, does not fall into the category of eating. Because as we said, eating means that when you benefit from it, you consume it, you use it up as you benefit from it. The main benefit from wood is use it for cooking or for baking. When we use wood for cooking and baking is not while it's burning, but rather after it's been burned up and it turns into charcoal, and it's no more even considered wood, that's when you benefit from it. Therefore, firewood is not similar to eating, and therefore something that is firewood during Shemitah doesn't have the status of Shemitah at all. So in this case, where you have a food that's not inherently reserved for human consumption, animal consumption, you can decide that I'm going to use it for firewood. And if I use it for firewood, it'll have no stringencies of Shemitah whatsoever. The Adabram points out you can only do this with the kinds of food that are, again, inherently not reserved for animal human consumption. If they are, you cannot decide I'm changing and using it for firewood. But a food that's not inherently reserved for animal or human consumption, that you can decide to use for firewood. The Mishnah is now going to give us examples of things that grow that would fall into this category. Things that are not reserved for human consumption, nor for animal consumption. And if you decide to use them for firewood, then they'll be firewood and have no sanctity of Shemitah whatsoever. And they are, going for instance, Hasiya v'ha'eza v'karanis. Artscar translates siya as savory, azav is hyssop, and a karanis is oregano. So these are examples of three things that are not inherently reserved for animal human consumption, at least certain times in the Mishnah. They could be, you could decide to use them for both, you can decide to use them for one, or you can decide to use them as firewood. Okay, now we'll do the Sefer HaMitzvot. And we are going to do now two mitzvahs that are related to each other. Mitzvah Ayin Vav, mitzvah 76 of the Sefer HaMitzvot Chavetz Chaim. Mitzvahs Aseh Liskar Masa Shasa Amalek. It's a mitzvah to remember that which Amalek did to us. Shenamar, as the pasuk states, Zohar Eis Asher Asalacha Amalek. Remember that which Amalek did to you. V'hainu, and what this means is, what it means to remember, means Liskar B'peh, actually means to remember with one's mouth, to actually mention it. We don't remember it just in our minds, we have to actually mention it. To remember orally his evil actions and the way he ambushed us. Even when everybody else was afraid of the Jewish people because of the miracles that God performed for them by the exodus from Egypt and from the splitting of the Red Sea, Amalek didn't care, and he ambushed us. We're supposed to remember that. In order actually to bestir our hearts to hate him. Amalek is the epitome of evil, and he is to be hated. And the way that we arouse and remember to hate Amalek for what he did and what he represents is to remember what he did every year. This applies in all places at all times. By both men and women. The Chavetz Chaim is following the opinion that the mitzvah to remember Amalek applies by women. According to the Chavetz Chaim, it's even midaraisa, according to the obligation, the way he's laying it out. According to many opinions, and in many ways, the general minhag is that although women do try to hear Amalek, do try to hear the reading of Zohar, which is where we fulfill the mitzvah of Amalek, according to most practice, according to most customs, it's not an obligation about them. The next mitzvah is mitzvahs asay lahachmer zarish Amalek. Has a commandment to actually cut off, to destroy the descendants, the children of Amalek. Shenamar, as it says, you shall remember to, you shall obliterate, you shall wipe out the memory of Amalek. Two mitzvahs. One mitzvah to remember what they did, another mitzvah to wipe them out. We don't know who is Amalek. Until Eliyahu Hanavi comes and tells us who he is. Who is Amalek? And then we shall obliterate, wipe out his memory from under the heavens. Hashem Yizakenu l'reis b'vias Eliyahu Hanavi. Hashem should merit us to see, to give us the merit to see the coming of Elijah the prophet, Mashiach Tzidkenu, Mashiach and our righteous Mashiach, Amen, quickly in our days, Amen. Now, with this, the Chavetz Chaim says, Tamu kol mitzvahs aseh anugos zman hazeh. With this, all the positive commandments that are applicable nowadays, we have done. Meaning, the first part of the Sefer HaMitzvot, the Chavetz Chaim, the whole point of the Sefer, the Chavetz Chaim, the Sefer HaMitzvot, his book of the mitzvahs, is to give us the chance to remember, to be aware of the positive, of the mitzvahs that are relevant nowadays, because there are many mitzvahs that aren't. So he has now completed the first half of his Sefer, which is to go through all the positive commandments that are relevant nowadays. That's what he means by Kamu kol mitzvahs aseh anugas b'zman hazeh. With this, we have completed all the positive commandments that are applicable, that are practiced nowadays. Misparam shiva mishiva. There are 77 of them. And then he gives us a mnemonic to remember that it's 77. Think of the words b'chayu b'hem. They shall live with them, which is actually the word that the Torah uses, the words b'chay b'hem, one should live with them, to teach us that a person should live through the mitzvahs. And the mnemonic that he gives is, instead of b'chay, it's singular form, b'chayu, and they will live in them. And if you take the numeric value of each one of the letters, it will come out to 77, and that's a mnemonic to remember how many positive mitzvahs, how many positive commandments are applicable nowadays. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful Shabbos, Chodesh Tov, a good Chodesh, you well.